Chapter 12, the ocean environment. The vast world ocean. Our planet is known as the blue planet. And if you see pictures from space, you know we're mostly blue. Nearly 71% of the Earth's surface is covered by oceans. Okay. If we add in all of the lakes and all that, it'd go up a little bit, but not much. Most of it's the ocean. Oceanography is a science that draws on the methods and knowledge of geology, chemistry, physics, and biology to study all aspects of the world's oceans. And if you go way back to physical science, you remember how studies overlap. Well, oceanography is a little bit of everything: geology, chemistry, physics, and biology. And to understand the ocean, you need all of those. Here you can see the northern hemisphere, and the northern hemisphere is most of the time called the land hemisphere because you notice there is more land than there is in the southern hemisphere. And since the northern hemisphere is known as the land hemisphere, the southern hemisphere is the water hemisphere. The world ocean can be divided into four main ocean basins: the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian, and the Arctic. The Pacific Ocean is largest and has the greatest depth. That was a homework question. The Atlantic Ocean is about half the size of the Pacific and not quite as deep. The Indian Ocean, largely a southern hemisphere body, is slightly smaller than the Atlantic. And the Arctic Ocean is about 7% the size of the Pacific. So the Arctic is the smallest. Here's the topography of the ocean. You can see the underwater ridges, the mountains underwater. Last thing I heard is there's like over 100,000 active volcanoes in the ocean. That's crazy to think of, but apparently it is. And this is topography. Again, this is your heights and depths of the ocean. Here's the Pacific, the Indians over here, Atlantic, Arctic. Mapping the ocean floor. Sonar is an acronym for sound navigation and ranging. It is also referred to as echo sounding. Sonar works by transmitting sound waves towards the ocean bottom. And here we see a really nice picture of sonar. Now, I will say is that the Germans were the first ones to map the ocean floor, especially we'll go back a little bit, in these areas along in here. They've mapped the ocean floor, and they did this before the start of World War II. So they knew where to hide their submarines. They knew the bottom of the ocean and where they could hide submarines after they would sink a bunch of ships and they would be hard to find. But anyway, sonar methods: outgoing signal, and the signal is reflected back and picked up by the ship, and it forms a picture. All right. We also use satellites. Satellites are available or are able to measure small differences by bouncing microwaves off the ocean surface. Using new technology, scientists have discovered that the ocean surface is not perfectly flat. Differences in height of the ocean surface are caused by the ocean floor features. So in other words, what this is saying is a satellite can bounce microwaves off of the ocean. And in these areas where there's mountains, where there's areas where there's a trench, the surface of the ocean is not flat. It is also fluctuating. Where there's mountains, the ocean surface is a little higher. Where there's trenches, the ocean is a little bit shallower, or the surface changes a little bit, which is kind of cool. And this is how it works. It shoots down these microwaves, and they're bounced up, and we can tell. And here you can see where the elevations are a little bit different, where there is more fluctuation in the bottom, the surface of the ocean will also fluctuate more. And again, it's not flat. We also, to map the ocean floor, we use submersibles, remote operated vehicles, or ROVs. Submersibles are small underwater crafts used for deep sea research, and we make these to withstand high pressure, therefore they can go deeper. Today, many submersibles are unmanned and operated remotely by computers. These remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, can remain underwater for long periods of time. The main regions of the ocean floor. The ocean floor regions are the continental margins, the ocean basin floor, and mid-ocean ridges. So let's take a look at the continental margins. A continental margin is the zone of transition between a continent and the adjacent ocean basin floor. Right here. These are the continental margins, okay? And you can see them. They are between the continent and the abyssal plain, okay, which is way out in the ocean floor. In the Atlantic Ocean, thick layers of undisturbed sediment cover the continental margin. This region has very little volcanic or earthquake activity. If we were on the west coast, the Pacific margin, there's a lot sharper drop off here. It drops off a lot closer to the land, and it's more volcanically active and more earthquake prone on the west coast. The east coast, the Atlantic, is fairly, I don't want to say smooth, but it drops off slowly. Okay. And again, here you can see a picture of the Atlantic continental margin. In the Pacific Ocean, oceanic crust plunges beneath continental crust. This force results in a narrow continental margin that experiences both volcanic activity and earthquakes. Continental shelves. The continental shelf is the gently sloping submerged surface extending from the shoreline. Continental shelves contain important mineral deposits, large reservoirs of oil and natural gas, and huge sand and gravel deposits. That's this area right here, the shallower area. Continental slope is the steep gradient that leads to the deep ocean floor and marks the seaward edge of the continental shelf. Right here. A submarine canyon is the seaward extension of a valley that was cut on the continental shelf during a time when the sea level was lower. A canyon carved into the outer continental shelf slope and rise in turbidity currents. Oh boy, why can't I say that today? A turbidity current is the downslope movement of dense sediment-laden water created when sand and mud on the continental shelf and slope are dislodged and thrown into suspension. So again, here are my submarine canyons right here. And a turbidity current is when a bunch of this right here slides down in, all right, and causes some debris in there. Oh, here's a better picture of it right. Yeah. Submarine canyons right here. These were carved when the sea level was lower. And these turbidity currents is when debris falls down into the ocean floor. Continental rise. A continental rise is the gently sloping surface at the base of a continental slope. The ocean floor basin, or ocean basin floor. Ocean basin floor is the area of the deep ocean floor between continental margins and the oceanic ridge. Deep ocean trenches. Trenches form at the sites of plate convergence, where the moving plate descends beneath another and plunges back into the mantle. The abyssal plain. An abyssal plain is a very level area of deep ocean floor, usually lying at the foot of the continental rise. The sediments that make up the abyssal plain are carried there by turbidity currents or are deposited as suspended sediments settle out. Okay, so what this is talking about here, the material is brought down by those turbidity currents. It's also it falls out from the ocean itself, the sediments, as the ocean loses its current, as the waves cut back, that suspended material starts to settle out and goes down onto the ocean floor, the abyssal plain. Seamounts and guyots. Seamount is an isolated volcanic peak that rises at least 100 meters above the deep ocean floor, and a guyot is an eroded, submerged seamount. And here's a cross section of the abyssal plain. You can see this guyot. Here's a volcanic peak. It's above. This would be a guyot. That's below. A mid-ocean ridge is found near the center of most ocean bases. It is an interconnected system of underwater mountains that have developed on newly formed ocean crust. All right, so if we go back, and I know this is going way back right here to here, you can see these mid-ocean ridges. Right here's one. You have all these mountains. Boom. Here's some more underwater mountains. Okay. Those are all those ridges. Again, a mid-ocean ridge is found near the center of most ocean basins. It's an interconnected system of underwater mountains that have developed on newly formed oceanic crust. Seafloor spreading is the process by which plate tectonics produces new oceanic lithosphere. It just means a layer at the ocean ridges. New ocean floor is formed at mid-ocean ridges as magma rises between the diverging plates and cools. Diverging means they are moving away from each other. Hydrothermal vents form along mid-ocean ridges, and these are zones where mineral-rich water, heated by the hot, newly formed oceanic crust, escapes through cracks in the oceanic crust into the surrounding water. Now, there are seafloor sediments. There's three basic types of seafloor sediments. Types of seafloor sediments. Ocean floor sediments can be classified according to their origin into three broad categories: terragenous sediment, biogenous sediment, and hydrogenous sediment. Terragenous sediment, terra firma, that's the ground, that's the earth. Terragenous sediments consist primarily of mineral grains that were eroded from continental rocks and transported to the ocean. Rivers carry that runoff, which is water that runs off the surface of the earth into the oceans. Biogenous sediment consists of shells and skeletons of marine animals and algae, and there are two types. There's calcareous ooze. It's a thick, common biogenous sediment produced by dissolving calcium carbonate shells, and siliceous ooze is biogenous sediment composed of silica-based shells or single-celled animals and algae. And then hydrogenous sediment. It consists of minerals that crystallize directly from ocean water through various chemical reactions in the ocean water. Here's some biogenous. You can see these used to be living organisms, all right, shells and that of living organisms. Resources from the seafloor. Oil and natural gas are the main energy products currently being obtained from the ocean floor. Gas hydrates are compact chemical structures made of water and natural gas. Most oceanic gas hydrates are created when bacteria break down organic matter in the ocean floor sediments. A lot of the gas hydrates are frozen. Okay, we find that in the northern areas where the bacteria break down organic matter. And those gas bubbles from that get trapped in ice. And here's some gas hydrates. Pretty cool. Notice this is a piece of ice, and they lit it, and it's releasing the gas out of the piece of ice. Kind of cool. Other resources, other major resources from the ocean floor include sand and gravel, evaporate salts, and manganese nodules. Sand and gravel. The offshore sand and gravel industry is second in economic value only to the petroleum industry. Magnesium nodules are hard lumps of manganese and other metals like cobalt, copper, and iron that precipitate around a small object. And then evaporate salts. When seawater evaporates, and you can buy sea salt in the store, what they do is they will when the tide comes up, they have these areas that flood, and they seal them off and um, let the ocean water evaporate out, and it leaves behind the salt, and they use that salt. All right. When seawater evaporates, the salt increases in concentration until it can no longer remain dissolved. When the concentration becomes high enough, the salt precipitate out of the solution and form a salt deposit. The most economically important salt is halite, and that's common table salt. And here's some manganese nodules. Remember, they have cobalt, copper, and iron in them, and we use that also. And that's it for this chapter. I hope this helps with your homework throughout the chapter, and good luck.